Hey, so I'm going to be presenting today, as you guys probably saw, in Sublime Text. I'll be talking especially about the snippet and the plugin feature. Is that good?
Nope, you're good.
Okay, excellent. So the snippet and the plugin features within Sublime, and I'll be going into sort of in detail for snippets and some of the more advanced features for those. Plugins, you can really get really complicated with those, so I'll be going into more basic plugins rather than advanced plugins, which can be really large Python applications, actually. I won't be covering tweaking settings or using a package control, which package control is, I think, probably the best way to sort of manage the plugins that you have within Sublime Text, but it's not really going to be within scope here. So I'm going to, I'll just jump right into snippets right now. So you can actually, I have Sublime Text open up here, and you can just go to tools at the top and hit new snippet, and Sublime will actually generate a snippet for you. So the idea of snippet in Sublime, for those of you who haven't used them, is that a snippet is basically just, it's like a template text.
That mic is very choppy.
Yeah, so I was just talking about snippets, and as I was saying, snippets are sort of just text templates within Sublime, so it's a good way to get rid of like boilerplate code that you find yourself typing over and over within Sublime, sort of repetitive things that you have to do in development work. Snippets are a really good way to automate that, so you can create that text really easily. And there are a few sort of, in this snippet that Sublime generates, there are a few sort of salient points. There's the text over here at the top within the C data field. That's just the text that Sublime is going to insert when you insert the snippet. So I can put some text here. Like let's say I want an HTML href element. Then I can just enter that in here. And when I insert the snippet, it'll add that text. And down here you have the tab trigger, and the tab trigger is one of the things that you'll probably want on all the snippets that you create, because it allows you to just type in that text and hit tab, and Sublime will put in the text. So if I, and I'll save this snippet really quickly so I can actually use it. So if I then type in that text, hit tab, Sublime goes and inserts the text. If I didn't define a tab trigger, I'd have to do something like Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P, depending on my environment. And type in snippet and the name of the snippet, which would do the same thing, but it's a lot more awkward. So you'll almost always want a tab trigger. And then the other thing that that the Sublime automatically fills in for you is this this source tag. So if I uncomment that out, what the source tag does is, or the scope tag rather, what it does is tell Sublime what language that snippet relates to. So this is, say, a Python snippet. So if I open up this file, which is a JavaScript file, you can see at the top there, and I try to enter in that snippet and tab replace, it won't allow me to use that snippet. But then if I switch it over to JavaScript, there we go. So the scope limits are sort of a good way of making sure that your snippets are organized and you don't accidentally use the wrong snippet for the wrong sort of file. Now I'm going to move on to a basic snippet that I actually use in my development work, which is.
Sorry to interrupt. What other values could you have in scope? So you have source.js, right? Is there anything besides source?
I think most of the different scopes begin with source dot, but then there's JS for JavaScript, Python. Basically, it's related to the different programming languages.
Okay.
So depending on what kind of file you have open that you're editing, that's what the different source file will be.
Can I have more than one?
I don't believe you can have more than one within the scope tag. I haven't actually investigated that.
Probably multiple scope tags.
Are you
That's what I was
asking
thinking.
if you can like have a snippet that goes like when you're inside function body, for instance, then the snippet applies, but otherwise.
I think you meant more like 2 languages.
Oh.
Yeah, so the question was about whether you can use a scope tag, like multiple scope tags, so that you can, for example, you might want to use one snippet within JavaScript and a Python file. I haven't actually investigated that. Actually, we can test that right now.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Might as well. So if you add a second tag, save this, and then try to insert that within the JavaScript file. Yeah, it works within the JavaScript file. Let me see what happens if I open up a Python file. And then try to enter that in. Yeah, it looks like it just ignores the second tag, so unfortunately that will not work. So but moving right on to a sort of more complex template, this is one that in modified form I actually use day to day in my development work, which just generates a sort of a basic constructor, the basic boilerplate code when you create a new Google Closure class. So you can see that there are a few, the $1 and the $2 symbols are really the things to look out for here, and those are what's called fields, which are just text that you enter in when you're inserting the snippet. and Sublime places it in the appropriate place, and you can, so that way when you're repeating the same phrase several times within the snippet, it's an easy way to do that. And you'll notice that the first place that I use $1 and $2, I actually use this curly brace syntax, and then colon, and then class or superclass. And those are default values for those fields. Usually when you create a snippet that has fields, you'll want some sort of default value just so it's easy to tell what kind of value goes there, what should be entered there. But if I go back to my test file, then I can insert that. So this one. Yeah, so I can enter in, say, the name of the class, the scope, all of that. Then I hit tab, it'll move on to the next thing. Hit tab again, and we'll just move to the end of the snippet. So fields are a good way to sort of create a more sophisticated snippet where you're going to be manipulating user input. And while in that case, I just defaulted the value to class and superclass, which are strings, and of course you can use any string there. But you can also use built-in environment variables, which if I go to this next snippet here, yeah, so tm file name is one of the examples of an environment variable. And if I insert this snippet into this file really quickly, then you'll see that I have the file name right there. So just directly inserting the file name into the snippet isn't very useful. You might want to use that for, like for instance, if you're doing a docstring generation within the snippet, something like that, then you might want to be able to insert the file name. But the nice thing is you don't have to just take that file name as it is and display it. You can actually do a regex transformation. So let me just copy the regular expression I've written here. Apply that to the field. Actually, I think that goes here. And if I do that within here, and then insert that snippet. There we go. So then Sublime will actually, it'll apply that regular expression and that filtering. So in this case, I've removed the file extension, I've removed the underscores, and it's actually the name of the class, which it can sort of infer based on the name of the file, assuming that you sort of have conventions for file names. And you can do modifications for a few different environment variables. I have a more complicated version of this template that I use, which actually looks at the file path as well, so it can figure out the namespace and the scope and all of that, and really quickly generate a lot of the boilerplate code that otherwise would be a pain to type in every single time. Let me just open up, I have a slide here for, these are a few of the environment variables. As I mentioned, there's the path, there's the file name. You can also have the username, which again might be useful for, like if you have some sort of simple documentation comment that usually goes at the end of the file, you might want to put your username there. The line index, the line number. I think the file name and the file path tend to be the most useful sort of environment variables to be using here. Let me just go back to yeah, so that's those are the main things with snippets. You can do that regular expression transformation anywhere you use that field is the other thing. So if I wanted to, for example, modify this this instance of where we're repeating that first field, then I could do something like that. And then if I insert that, you'll notice that where it appears down here, it's actually capitalized. And you can do really complex transformations again, or you might want to make certain parts of it uppercase or lowercase, convert something from camel case to underscores. It's pretty simple with different regular expressions. I won't be going into regular expressions in too much detail here. I mean, there's a lot of reference material that can be found pretty easily on the internet. But you can do some pretty complicated transformations there, which make the snippets pretty handy. But moving on from snippets, plugins within Sublime are almost as easy to create as snippets. You can actually go to Tools and click New Plugin at the top, and that'll begin as a plugin for you. I don't think that's really quite as useful as new snippets, since for plugins you usually going to want a few different files. You should probably create your own directory. What I usually do when I'm creating a new plugin is I go to the go to Preferences and hit Browse Packages, and that'll take you to the directory where Sublime stores all the packages for your particular system. And where that file is going to be different based on your operating system. It's going to be different for OS X, different for Linux. So it's usually easier to click that than to try to find it within the sort of Finder or within Windows Explorer or whatever you're using. So you go in there and you create a folder. I've actually already created a directory for the plugin that I'll be working on today, the experimental directory. And then you just create a Python file within there. So I'm going to go to that Python file within the text editor. And what you'll notice is this is really, it's just a pretty simple Python file here, a simple Python script. It imports the built-in Sublime classes and functionality at the top, and that extends the Sublime class. And that's basically what creating a plugin is for Sublime. You just create a Python file that has a few classes that extend built-in Sublime types. And let me just open up a slide really quickly to So these are the different types of built-in Sublime classes. And the three at the top are sort of, those are commands that will be run one time. So you might run that command from hitting a keyboard shortcut within Sublime, or you might have one command trigger another command. There are text commands that run for particular tabs, and they'll have information about all the text that's open within that tab, the file that's within that tab. Window commands are more commands that don't relate to a specific tab, but might manipulate several tabs, create new tabs, that kind of thing. And application commands, I've never actually had to create an application command, but I guess that's if you want to have multiple windows and be manipulating those windows from within the command. Usually text commands are the ones you're going to want to extend. And then event listener, actually it's not like any of the other built-in Sublime classes, because rather than being a command that you run one time, it's actually a type that Sublime has defined where there are a series of methods that you can override that'll get called whenever a particular thing happens. So this is a list of a few of those methods. Whenever a new file is opened, whenever a file is saved, whenever you switch the tab, whenever you modify the particular tab that you're in, it'll call one of those event methods. So then you can just modify what happens there, and you can create the plugin in that way. I'll just go back to the example plugin that I had here. You'll see that this one, it only overrides one class, and that class is the event listener. And then it overrides the onPresave function. So what this plugin was recently Reach sort of changed some of our white space conventions in the way that we formatted our JavaScript files. We wanted to remove some of the, before we had blank lines before var statements, for example, and we wanted to stop doing that. And then I also added some checking to remove excessive white space. So what this plugin basically does is whenever you save your file, if it's a JavaScript file, it removes the excess white space and makes formatting like it should be. So just to sort of demonstrate what it does, if I do something like function, and then I hit save, you'll see it immediately fixed the white space for me. So I had seen that a lot of people were sort of doing manually changing a lot of the white space throughout our project, so I figured a plugin would be a really quick way to fix that. And since doing that, I mean, it essentially takes a few lines. So automating things can happen really quickly within Sublime Text, and I figured a plugin would be. So this is just sort of a simple example. And you'll see that pre-save, it passes in the view, and the view is just the tab that happened to be active whenever you call that command, or whenever the save was actually triggered. So you take that view, you call the built-in file name command to figure out whether it's a JavaScript file, and then it does some white space changes. And whenever you want to change want to actually do a text change within a buffer or within a file that's open in Sublime Text, you can't just get the text all at one time, change the text, and send it back in. What you actually have to do is create an edit object. So in this case, you have the view, you call begin edit on the view, then it gives you that edit object, which then you pass in on, say, the replace call, or if you were inserting new text, you would pass the edit object to the insert call, and so on. And then once you finish the editing, you call end edit, and it flushes those changes to the actual file and to the actual tab so that the user can see them. So it's a pretty simple interface. There's documentation for it online. It's, I think, pretty self-explanatory. There is one thing, the regions, that's another class that you'll usually want to be creating so that you can do text modifications. A region, you just have to pass in the beginning and pass in the end, and those are actually just integers, so you can do something like index +1 to figure out how to select just one character at a time. So that's sort of the interface that Sublime Text uses to do text manipulations within it. And then,
well, sorry, what does a region represent exactly?
A region represents, like, for example, if I do this, then that section right there, that's a region.
Okay.
So, and it can be sort of any section within the file. It does have to be contiguous. Like I couldn't have, if I have several sections selected at once, those would all be separate regions.
Okay.
So.
Can you apply this plugin to all files in a directory or folder?
Yeah, so Satish was asking whether I could apply that command to all the files within a directory. It was within a directory you were asking, right? Yeah, so I'd have to probably, that is one thing to keep in mind, because on pre-save will just be called for literally every file that saves. So what you want to do is you want to do a check once you're within that function to make sure that it's within that directory in your example. In this case, I'm just checking that it's within a JavaScript file. And you want to be especially careful if you, for example, override the onModify function, because that will get called literally every time the user presses a key within the buffer. So, yeah, you really want to make sure that whatever you do there happens really quickly, or Sublime Performance will almost do really terrible and you won't use it.
I think what Satish was getting at is like instead of writing a sed or something, you could just run the plugin on the directory.
Right.
Formatting or something. I don't
Like if
think-
you have a bunch of files that you wanted to apply cleanup spaces and stuff, can you use the plugin to do it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you could conceivably, because you can really call any Python function within a plugin. So you could open up all the files within a directory, do manipulations within that. I think in that case it might be a good idea, though, just to write a script sort of outside of Sublime, probably. Plugins are usually more helpful if it's just, if it sort of aids in your editing, rather than just doing large-scale file manipulations. So I have one more example of a command here, which is, we do a lot of automated testing in Reach, and a lot of times it's helpful to be able to run the unit tests really quickly. We actually have a local test runner, which we have open on most of our machines at all times. So I figured it would be helpful to have a command so I can just hit a key and open a test file that I have open within the browser. So I created this command, and you can see it's a really quick, plugin to write. It's only a few lines, very basic Python. I just override the run function, which is defined on all of those different command types. And that gets called whenever that command is run. I check what the current directory is. I check that there is a current directory, because if there isn't any directory, obviously I can't run the tests for it. And if there is, then I just call a built-in webbrowser.open function, which is a Python function defined in the standard library. And oh, sorry. What was
Can
your
you look
question,
at
Joe?
Sublime's console, like, so you could have a console that, like, Sublime has an embedded console, is that correct?
Yeah, and you can call commands from that embedded console. Did you have a question about that?
Well, we're switching to Karma, so that does like console logging of the.
So running your tests on the console
So,
instead of
yeah,
like
instead of opening a browser or whatever, you could have it just.
Yeah, so Joe was wondering about, you were asking about whether you can actually like get at the console from Sublime, or
Yeah.
run. I think you could run console commands from it pretty quickly, because running console commands isn't something that's very difficult to do in Python. I don't know if accessing an already open console would be easy. I haven't really investigated it.
I think he was asking about opening the Sublime console.
Oh, opening the Sublime console? Oh, well, you can just hit a key to do that. It's like control.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can log text to the Sublime console really easily from within plugins. I don't know what the exact function calls are for them. I haven't tried to do it before, but it's, I think, pretty simple.
So how do you map this to a command?
Yeah, I was just
to demonstrate that.
Yeah, just about to get to that. So you can create a .sublime command folder, or a .sublime commands file. And what you do with that is you just within that have a simple JSON object. In this case, it's this section of it that I added. And caption is what will appear in the context menu for Sublime. So if I hit Control-Shift-P and so right up there within that, now I have that command listed. And it just lists whatever text I put within caption. And that command is what you actually type in within the Sublime console if you want to run that command. So if I go back to the Sublime console as I was doing before, and what was the command type? Open Jasmine spec.
You're already in spec.
What's that?
I was saying you're already in spec.
Oh, yeah. Oh, not sure why it's not working in the console at this moment, but if I can just go to the, as I was showing up here, I can just hit the OpenJS spec there, and, oh, part of it is, this is wrong, that's the wrong command. It's the, open test in browser that I wanted to show you guys. So if I hit that, and you can't see it now because the browser isn't open, but if I click that, it's opened up the file and ran all the tests on it. So that's a pretty simple, example of how to create a Sublime command. You can actually also define a keyboard shortcut really easily. There is a catch with that. With keyboard shortcuts, you'll want to define a Sublime keymap file, but you can't just do like, I couldn't do jasmine.sublime keymap. Jasmine wouldn't actually find that. It has to be like default or user.sublime keymap. And then parentheses the environment, I think generally. So default parentheses Linux, default parentheses OS X. And then again, it's just a simple JSON object. So I define that keyboard command, in this case control 5, and it calls the command, and the command of the name, you can see open browser test, is the same as the one that I have right there. So if I go to the file and I hit control 5 like that, and again, you can't see it, but if you go to the browser, it's opening up another tab which has the tests that are running. It'll just take a second to run that, and they should all pass, of course. So that's creating a Sublime plugin. You can use those built-in file types. A lot of times you'll actually want to override several different built-in types. You might want to create a plugin that has several commands, and you might want to have a listener and also a text command and also a window command. That's some slides about that if I can. So in that case, there's a Sublime.settings object, which the Sublime API will define. And usually that's the easiest way to get communication among sort of different commands that otherwise aren't related within the sort of hierarchy of types. You can also, if you've got a plugin that you think is pretty useful and that a lot of other people might be interested in, package control, which is the plugin that I briefly mentioned earlier, that'll let you manage other Sublime plugins. You can actually submit your plugin to the package control online website, and people can really easily just hit a few buttons and install it on their text editor. So that's I believe that's all the points that I wanted to cover about extending Sublime. Were there any other questions about that?
So when you have a snippet and you want to share it, or where do you put snippets to be able to invoke them?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I should have covered that. Yeah, so Bill was asking about invoking snippets, and if I go up to back to Sublime, you can see that snippets can go basically wherever the plugins go, the snippets can go. And what it is if you open up the Sublime Browse Packages, the packages directory, basically. Sublime looks through everything in the packages directory, and it looks for all the commands that you have defined, and it looks for all the different snippets. It'll look in all the subdirectories too. Usually you're going to want to save your snippets within the user directory, and that's where I have most of mine. So, but basically anywhere within packages, Sublime will look for the snippets and find them so you can insert them. Any other questions?
What other ideas do you have for snippets?
What's that?
What other ideas do you have for snippets or plugins?
Well, I've been thinking about trying to, one of the other plugins that I actually developed, which I didn't show here, was a test generator, which I'm actually probably going to do some modification of sometime in the near future. But what it basically did was it analyzed the file that you happen to have open, and it generated a simple unit test sort of stub for that, so that you could start creating tests really quickly. So test generation is one definite possibility. And Bill mentioned that we're going to be moving to a Karma pretty soon for our tests, or Joe mentioned it, I'm sorry. So that would be another thing that I think would be nice to automate, so that you don't have to worry about entering in console commands yourself. You can just hit a few keyword choices. Really, the sky's the limit as it goes with plugins. I mean, you can any Python code you can basically put in a plugin. So
I've got one for Chef that uses all the Chef resources. So nice.
Oh, nice. Matt was saying he has a Chef plugin now. So any other questions? Or?
Have you played with triggering a snippet within a plugin? Does that make any sense? Like
Yeah, so Hannah was asking about triggering a snippet within a plugin. I have tried that. The thing is, the snippet functionality, it's really handy if you, it's like, it's a simple plugin in its own right in some ways, like with the tab behavior and so on. I usually found that just manually entering the text using the edit objects was easier than using a snippet.
Okay.
I actually wasn't able to figure out what the hooks were for triggering the snippets from within the plugins. I think part of the problem is that once you trigger a snippet, you sort of lose control of things. I mean, Sublime takes over. I haven't looked at the Sublime Text 3 interface. I imagine that might have some other capabilities for that. Any other questions? Okay, well, that's that. I'm going to, I'll be posting the slides that I have up here on the wiki, and probably a link to some GISTs with all the different files I've demoed here. But thanks for coming to hear my presentation. Have a good day.